Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to join me today. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that's very dear to me, which is the topic of play. And play is not something new. There's a lot of research on it. Uh, but today, we're going to focus on the intentionality of play and what we as teachers do. So today's title is Creating Language Opportunities During Play-Based Learning. Good afternoon again. My name is Dr. Iracema Salinas Gonzalez. So, who's joining us today? I know that earlier Karen asked you to include your name, where do you work, your position. Go ahead and do that. So that way, when we're interactive, we'll know who we're engaging with. Go ahead and include that in the chat. So there's a couple of I guess, understandings, agreements for this workshop is first of all is to be present. In order for you to get the best from the workshop, we need you to be able to engage, be present, listen, talk, collaborate, engage in the chat, engage in the breakout rooms. So be present, participate, use the chat, and engage with others. So these are the workshop objectives. We're going to discuss how guided play extend children's language and learning opportunities. And we're also going to explore how play-based learning facilitates scaffolding and how it supports language development for children. So just because children are playing, it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, there's going to be a lot of language. And yes, that will happen, but there's something very important that we as teachers do. So we're going to talk a lot about guided play and scaffolding, what we do. And at the very end, we're going to also talk about how to organize that early childhood classroom that is clearly established with defined areas that are very purposeful and connected to play-based learning opportunities. So we're going to start, first of all, by using the chat. So every time you see the little speaking bubbles, or the people with that little circle, that means we're all engaging. So what are preschoolers like? I want you to use the chat and respond to that. What are preschoolers like? What do preschoolers like to do? Yes, they're energetic. They're busy exploring. That's right. They're curious. That's right. They love to pretend. I see a lot of playing in there. They love to play. They're playful. They are loud. Very good. Again, the word engaging, funny, playful. That is so on target. So preschoolers like to do all of that, right? They're energetic, they're talkative, they're physically active. They want to touch and move and shake things and themselves. They're gaining mastery over their body and how it moves, and they're learning to coordinate those movements, their large motor skills and also those fine motor skills. And that attention span is still working. It's not mastered, but it's lengthening. It's becoming a little bit better. We call that self-regulation. They're learning how to regulate their emotions, their feelings, their attention. And boy, somebody said they're funny, right? They're funny. They invent words such as bubble fly. They're searching for friends, and play dominates their life and learning. They love to play. They play with everything. Those of you that are parents, you know, and those of you that are teachers of preschoolers, you know that when you see a preschooler not moving around too much, that's cause for concern. We start wondering whether they're not feeling well. So preschoolers are playing a lot, and play dominates. It dominates those preschool years. And during those preschool years is when we also get to see their imagination at its full bloom. We also get to see a lot of the dramatizing at its height. And they're very enthusiastic about exploring the world. So we know that, remember that, we know they love to play. But what we also know is that there is research about preschoolers who are multilingual learners, who are dual language learners. And if you look at all their latest research and publications, they all mention everything that you put on the chat, but they also mention that as teachers, we need to be very intentional in how we use language and how we guide children's thinking and when they're playing. So here I have some resources. There is social cultural perspectives on play, and it tells us that it is fundamental in the development of children's cultural identity and learning. We know that children from different cultures who speak different languages, who have different backgrounds, they all play. However, they may play different. Play is considered very important for all children, regardless of their language. And as teachers, we need to be very observant as we're assessing them. How is it that they're playing? We also know that it contributes to language development and the development of concepts, the development of math, the development of sciences, social studies, and language arts. And we know that nowadays children need more opportunities to play because it develops their social and emotional well-being as well. Now, for young emergent bilingual children or multilingual children or dual language children, social dramatic play dominates their time, but it also motivates them. So play motivates children to practice what they're doing, and it also motivates them to use that second language. And it does that in a very non-threatening, non-isolating way. So sometimes children, although they may not speak the language because they want to play or they want to connect with others because of what they're playing with, they feel less threatened. And sometimes they're engaged in translanguaging, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Or sometimes they'll just be making signs or just smiling, trying to engage with the other children. We also know that social dramatic play provides a natural context. We also know that just playing provides a natural context for children. When children are playing, we will get to see their strengths because it's a natural context for children. However, we also have learned that play is often sacrificed for English instruction that is more structured and more teacher initiated. So in other words, we tend to do more of the let's do remediation, let's do drilling because, well, you don't speak English. So we have that negative mentality or stereotype thinking that, well, you can't play because we need to do some English instruction. Yet the research tells us that when we use play, it's going to help children learn their native language, but also learn their second language. So again, you see the little bubble with the chat? So let's engage with this question. What is the value of play for young children, and especially emergent bilingual or multilingual children? Go ahead and respond to this in the chat. So what is the value of play for young emergent bilingual or multilingual children? Very nice. I see you engaging. Some of them say relating themselves, encourages them for informal conversations, exposure to that new language. Thank you. So much language. That's right, Jeannie. Social skills. That's right, Madison. I see language everywhere. Communication. Visual representation of words. That's right. When things are popping and moving. And again, because it's informal, it does make them feel safe. Thank you so much for participating. So we know that it creates an integrated opportunity for children to learn context and content within the context of play. So because play is informal for them, it's less threatening or non-threatening, they start to learn the math and the science and all these content. And we also know that play creates a space for children to engage in translanguaging, where you might have a child just speaking English and the other one responding with pointing or multimodal ways with gestures or in their native language. We also know that it provides opportunities for children to engage in all types of play. Sometimes children just want to play by themselves, especially when they're not very familiar with that second language. Sometimes they start learning playing in parallel play, just playing next to somebody to see how the other one is playing. Sometimes they'll be playing through associative ways. Maybe it may look like they're sharing the blocks, but not really. It's just that they're both playing with the blocks until eventually they start to cooperate and they start sharing as they're playing. We also know that play allows for differences in children's developmental abilities, right? Especially when we provide choices in play so that no child feels like my interests are not being addressed. And it also addresses children's different learning styles. The more children play, it's going to contribute to their self-regulation because they have to learn to wait their turn, share with somebody else. They start using their creativity and problem solving. Just yesterday, I was playing with a class where I gave them just straws. And my original plan was to give them the straws with tape, but I didn't have the tape. So I said, look what I found. I found straws. What could we do with these? And by the time you know it, these children were tying straws like zip ties. I hadn't thought about that one. They were connecting straws and they were creating all these buildings. And as they were doing that, I was able to address all areas of their development, regardless of their native language. So now let's focus on creating language opportunities during play. So we all agree, based on your chats, that definitely it provides an opportunity to develop language. However, the research tells us that this will only happen if the teacher gets involved in guided play, because then we become scaffolds for children during play. So let's focus on creating language opportunities during play. So we're going to be placing you in a breakout room, in small groups in breakout rooms. And in your breakout room, I want you to discuss why is playing with Play-Doh an interesting learning experience for preschoolers. I think I go to, 99% of the preschool classrooms that I visit, there's always Play-Doh. There's always Play-Doh. So why is playing with Play-Doh an interesting learning experience for preschoolers? So you're going to be talking to your peers, your colleagues, and answering this question in your breakout room. So please join your breakout room. Okay, thank you for engaging in your breakout rooms and talking to your peers. Why is play with Play-Doh an interesting learning experience for preschoolers? There's a lot of vocabulary that children can develop while playing with Play-Doh. What were some of the vocabulary that y'all talked about that you mentioned?
I would say this is Sheila. My camera's not on. Flat, squish, spin, turn, um, roll it. Uh, it's a whole lot of words you can use.
I
Huge, you can
love
put it
that.
all together, making it huge, making it small, making pieces. So there's a lot of language with the kids.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Look, somebody said press, comparison words, maybe
Mhm.
words that talk about the texture.
Texture.
Maybe words that deal with feelings or words that deal with smelling and counting, right? There's so much vocabulary with Play-Doh.
Right, describing texture, using new vocabulary words.
Yes. So I have a video that I'm going to share with you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the video for you. And I want you to be very observant with this particular teacher.
In this video, the teacher uses a song to label the physical actions of children while they play with Play-Doh. Typically, children hear more object labels than action labels, but hearing action labels is just as important for building vocabulary. Let's see how this looks in a real classroom setting. Roll, roll, roll your Play-Doh. Pound, pound your Play-Doh. Poke, poke, poke your Play-Doh. Play-Doh. Hack, hack, hack your Play-Doh. Squeeze your Play-Doh. Squeeze your Play-Doh. Squeeze. Yeah.
Okay, now I want you to add to that list. I want you to add to that list. So include it in the chat. And of course, some of you were already mentioning it earlier, some of those vocabulary words. So go ahead and continue adding to the chat. What other vocabulary could we add? So keep adding, keep adding. Pool. Yeah, so somebody said verbs, like which ones? So she said poke and pat. So think about other words. And remember in the video, they talked about how many times as teachers, we focus so much on just the object labels, but the action labels are so important. Very good, like push and pull and squish, squeeze, stretch, pound, roll, tear. Very good. Thank you for sharing. Lots of really good ideas. Did you notice how the teacher provided meaningful and content-rich learning experiences through play? Did you notice that there was a balance between child-led and adult-guided play? So child-led is when the child is taking agency in what they're doing, right? And then what the teacher's doing on the side is just labeling, verbal mapping the actions of the child. So the teacher is providing some guided play on the side. And did you also notice how they created a play environment focused on learning objectives? So this particular teacher probably had the objective of action labels. And it also provides a scaffold to stimulate reflection and deeper learning in children. So as teachers, when we provide that guided play, we become very intentional. So it's not just taking out that Play-Doh, but what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose? What is the teacher going to do to guide children's play? So what happens when a child arrives at preschool with limited skills in English or their native language? How can they learn to interact socially and play with others? Go ahead and respond in the chat. Yes, give them visual cues. Always observe children, maybe work with them in small groups. So how can they learn to interact socially and play with others? Somebody said visual cards. give them opportunities to observe so that they hopefully imitate others. Modeling. So somebody put modeling there. Sit with them. That's called parallel play, when you sit next to somebody and you play next to somebody. Parallel play. Modeling for them. Because we'll have some children that perhaps come to us, right? And they're still, they haven't had that opportunity to interact socially and play with others. So an idea is to involve them in that guided play. So that guided play is where the child has agency and chooses and decides what to play with, how to play with, but the teacher becomes a guide on the side, and you are going to be providing some gentle guidance. So you don't take over like in directed play. In directed play, we say, children, when you go to the block center, we're going to be creating a farm. That's directing. But you provide that gentle guidance on the side so that when children do go to the block center and they are playing, then you are providing them opportunities to verbal map and giving them vocabulary. Perhaps you play with them so that you can model how to play. You maybe sit next to somebody so that hopefully they're observing you how to play. Or sometimes you play with somebody and you're just co-playing with them. So again, we're focusing on guided play. Intentionally creating playful environments for learning is very important because the reality in our schools is that we're becoming more academic, and we're not focusing so much on play anymore. But play is valuable, especially for preschool children. And we know that that's when learning happens for preschool children because they're mentally active, they're engaged, and they're so focused when they're playing that they don't have time to be disruptive. And I know what you're thinking. Some of you are like, oh no, I've had children that when, they're playing, they're very disruptive. And that's when I always go back and ask the teacher, then we need to assess that environment. We need to assess the play activity, because when children are truly engaged, engrossed in some play activity that is tailored for their interests, their needs, they don't have time to get distracted. And it's a perfect time for them to interact with their peers and adults, their teachers. So why guided play? Because during guided play, again, children are engaged in free play, but the adult has a big role. I think many times supervisors, school principals, administrators don't support a lot of play in the classroom when we're missing number two, the adult guidance, right? It's not free play, but it's free play with adult guidance because you do have a goal. We do have a learning goal, right? Because if we don't have a learning goal, then we're not targeting a lot of our standards. So let's pretend I have you right there and I have this with you. And we're going to be playing. And we know that preschoolers play with everything. They play with anything that they find. So look at this tray that I have here. So go ahead and choose. Let's pretend that you're right here with me, or I'm right there with you. And there's this tray, this little tray full of all these items. And you're exploring one of those items. And you're thinking about all its attributes. Did you choose something already? So choose. Okay, tell me what you chose. So let's be curious, like Virginia says, and choose something. And be curious with that frog or that seashell or that top or that shell that Colette chose or that mustard bottle. Be curious. Let's move it around. The gum dispenser, the seashell. Choose something. Very good. Susan chose the giraffe, the star, the potato masher, the wrench. Okay, so you already chose something. So I want you to examine that item carefully and think about all its characteristics and properties. Think about all its characteristics and properties. Think about all the characteristics and properties. How can we sort these? How could we organize them? How could we classify them? So in the chat, go ahead and include again. How could you classify and sort? So you're shaking, you're throwing things, you're bouncing them around. You're a preschooler. Let's play with these. Very nice, Sandra. Things you find outside, things from nature. And I love those words, right? We want preschoolers to use those words: nature, outside, things that are spotted, things that roll, things that by size. Color, shape, and size is the easiest way of sorting and classifying. So I want you to start thinking a little bit higher level. Things by texture, things that are round, maybe by the patterns, things that spin. Very nice. And children would automatically do that in the classroom, right? So then when children are playing with these, we need to think about guiding them as they're playing. And we guide them through our scaffolds. And a scaffold could be a question. A scaffold could be when we add more materials. And a very simple scaffold would be something like these two examples. What else can you tell me about the object you were playing with? How did you decide to sort them or classify them? When we're guiding children's learning through playful experiences, we'll automatically connect to math, science, language arts, art, drama, and all those content areas. Because when we're guiding them, we have an objective in mind. So it's not just taking out a tray of items, taking out the Play-Doh, taking out lottos or bingos, but it's what is my objective and how am I going to guide children? So now we're moving to the block center, the construction center. How can teachers guide children's play in the block center? So again, you see the circle with the little bubbles? That means you are chatting. You're chatting with each other. You're sharing ideas. So how can teachers guide children's play in the block center? Keep using the chat. Very nice. How tall? Focus on the tall. How tall is your structure, your building? I love those words. Building, community. How can you guide? Counting, offering them other things to add, focusing on the shapes, talking about what they're building, discussing with them, right? And then, of course, for assessment, we want to take pictures of what they're creating, their construction, because then we can share with our parents. Use construction words. I love that. So we have to use construction words. We have to be very intentional. And that's what guided play is all about. I've seen fabulous block centers where children go and build, but nobody sits with them. And again, sometimes we just need to be on the side and let them play and construct, but then we have to go and sprinkle some language, especially with our dual language learners, multilingual learners. We have to empower them with the vocabulary and the verbal mapping. It is so important. So we use guiding questions, just like some of you were mentioning. So when children are playing, we guide them. How did you manage to balance your structure? What can you tell me about your creation? Let's label your construction. So always having those markers, crayons, or pencils, tape. What do you think those might be, right? So those guiding questions should happen during play. Okay, are y'all ready to move from your seats and do a little bit of playing? I was sharing with Miss Karen that, usually, we're going to do a workshop with play about play. We need to be moving. So I'm going to ask you to, at this point, we're going to be building with household items around you. Let's look around you. What do you have? Oh, I have some hand sanitizer. Oh, I have um some cleaner for my glasses here. So you're going to work alone because we're far from you. So you're going to build a structure using objects that you found in your house. So gather some things and I'll give you it's going to be the 1 minute challenge. So find some things. Let's start building. You can use That's perfect. Virginia says, I'm using books. You can use anything. And I see how Virginia is building and is already thinking about how to guide children during play. Yes, Susan, recycling items, reusable items, right? When it comes to play, we can play with anything around us. Okay, are y'all ready to show us? Show us your construction through the camera. So everybody show us your construction. Oh, look at Amber. My goodness, Amber, you got creative. Look at Diana Jacobs. Angie, wow, look at that. I see how you were able to gather things from your kitchen. Lisa, I see that you have several containers. Are those jars, Lisa?
They're candles in jars.
Oh, okay. I just saw little jars. I was gonna say, are those jars of cream? But no, they're candles, you see? Wow, y'all got so creative. Look at Madison. Now, Madison in 1 minute was able to do that. Madison, what can you tell us about your construction?
I have a big bag full of colorful pens and highlighters. So I just stacked them up to make a nice structure.
I see that. That takes a lot of coordination, problem solving. So now think about children and all the questions and vocabulary that we can give them, right? Um, think about some of the questions that we can ask. Think about some of the vocabulary that we can use, the jar, the candle, the balance. Talk about the height. We can use words such as, what can you tell me about your creation? Now, I'm going to ask you to share. How did you manage to balance those objects? Go ahead and tell me, how did you manage to balance those objects? And of course, if I could see you better, I would say, how did you manage to balance those 10 items or those 10 markers or those 3 candles? We have to be very specific in using the language with children. So somebody says stacked. That's a word. Love it. Oh, somebody says I use the bigger ones or bigger items on the bottom. Good thinking. Oh, somebody says they use things that were flat. They looked at the size. Heavier items, right? So there's a strategy. And then as teachers, right, when we're right there observing them playing, we verbal map and we use, I notice you used, and then just give them the vocabulary. I notice you used 10 colorful markers for your construction. And then even extend their play. How can you build your structure taller? And then make them think, what can you do to prevent your building from collapsing? So what is the role of the teacher when children play? So we're going to join our breakout room just for a couple of minutes. And I want you to answer this question. What is the role of the teacher while children play? So go ahead and join your breakout room. I see movement. Okay, welcome back. It's great to see that you all are engaging with your peers. The role of the teacher while children play. We have a very important role, right? So as teachers, we observe and respond to children. Sometimes we just observe, and sometimes we respond. We empower them with vocabulary, or we respond with some guidance to make them think even at a higher level. Sometimes we interact with children during their play and provide scaffolding. We want to always introduce them to new vocabulary. So sometimes preschoolers might not use the word balance. They'll just say, it fell or it didn't stay up. But introducing children to new vocabulary in a way that's personally relevant to the child. And vocabulary makes more sense when it connects to the actual activity that whatever's happening during play. Teachers also participate in children's play, but we do not take over. And children will be very honest, especially preschoolers, when they don't want us to be there. We also model play behaviors to help those that are less skilled children. And when we're using that vocabulary, that language, and we're giving them instructions. And we introduce new props to enhance children's study or children's play. Now, let me share an example here of some research that I did with some preschool teacher in Head Start Center, where the teacher noticed that children this was a bakery, a panaderia, and a bakery and a panaderia, it's not really the same thing, but a panaderia is a little cultural place where they sell bread that's, part of the Hispanic culture, which is not the same thing as a bakery at a big store. So the teacher noticed that the children were not using the word tongues or pinzas, right? So when you go to these panaderias, these bakeries, you use a tongue, the pinzas, to get the bread. So the way the teacher introduced that word, she went in there and she said, "Good morning. I'm here to deliver the two tongues that the panaderia manager ordered." So the little girl just giggled and got the tongues and continued playing. So this is when teachers just go in the play and get out of the play, but you introduce a new word. What I notice is that as I continued observing children playing bakery, every now and then they would go back and say, "Teacher, what did you say these are called?" And then those children that remembered that word started using it, and then others started to follow. So young children's language development requires that as teachers, we guide children and we use the language that we want them to use during play. And young children's language development requires that they interact with peers. It also requires meaningful opportunities to practice their communication skills. So they need us to give them also the time to play, the place to play, the materials to play, the language to play. Some other strategies that guide children's playing is the verbal mapping. When we just map out the actions, we talk about what children are doing. I noticed that you're rolling the dice. You rolled the dice really far away. We also provide them props, and we create a print-rich play environment. So when we're playing with children, as I mentioned earlier, we might just be sitting next to a child and we are involved in parallel play, especially when we can tell that the child doesn't want to play with us, but we're still modeling when we're doing parallel play. Sometimes we just have to be the play tutor and tell them exactly how to spin or how to roll the dice or how to count. Sometimes we co-play, and sometimes we are the spokesperson of reality. When we start noticing that children are using things, let's say they're in the dramatic play center and you have a grocery store and you have things just thrown all over your grocery store, then you can go and play with them, but you're the spokesperson of reality when you say, my goodness, there's so many things thrown on aisle 10. We need a cleanup. If somebody comes through here, they're not going to be able to buy items at the store. So you just give them, make them aware. Play creates a context for learning. We know that. So let's practice guiding children's play in the science center. So these are some real children. So Pedro says, look, and especially many times my experience with dual language learners, many times everything is just look, look, look. They use one word, right? Or they might say, look, leaves. What would you say to extend his language during play? So look at that picture. And Pedro just said, look, leaves. What would you say to extend his language during play? So go ahead and use the chat. Go ahead and use the chat. So what would you say to Pedro? And use the actual words. What would you say? So Pedro just said, look, leaves. We want to extend that language during play. Very good. Somebody says, Pedro, let's use the magnifying lens to check out the veins on the leaves. Can you find leaves that are the same shape? Look at the color. Did you notice that it's an ochre color? You know, ochre is one of those big words that many of them might not use it or say it yet. In that tray that the teacher's holding, I see ochre color leaves. See, many times we just focus on yellow, green, very basic. Where did these leaves come from? Where did you see leaves today? Thank you, Susan. How many leaves do you think we have on this tray? I love these ideas you're sharing. I see the leaves too. Let's feel them. And then remember, and then we want to extend the language. Let's feel them. How do they feel? Because we want to continue that serve and serve and return conversations. Very good. What can we make with these leaves? Excellent, excellent. I like the way you're engaging. And of course, what other materials would you add to extend the play? Somebody said magnifying lens. What else would you add to extend the play with leaves? So what else would you add? A ruler. I like that. Marcela, you said a ruler. Paper and crayons for rubbings. Tree bark. Play-Doh. paint. Leaves are one of those open-ended things that we can use. Jars for sorting. Very good ideas. And of course, always thinking about enriching their play environment. So think about their reading and writing connection, the books, the word walls. We also know that bilingual children engage, or dual language children engage in translingual play, because their goal is to get their message across to non-bilingual speakers. And each child is going to be using their own language when they're playing. So now let's look at this classroom. Look at this classroom. What should we consider when creating a developmentally appropriate environment that includes play-based opportunities? So go ahead and include in the chat. So let's go ahead and chat. What should we consider? What should we consider? Very nice, Emily, making sure toys are out. That the toys that are out are developmentally appropriate. Make sure that they're not choking hazards, making sure that they're clean, making sure that they have enough space. When we give them too much space, it's conducive to running. When you don't get enough space, it's conducive to bumping and management issues. The bright colors, thank you for sharing that. The shelves, making sure everything is at an eye level. Thinking about mobility for children with special physical needs. Thinking about the centers with pictures, right? Especially with multilingual children, dual language children, we need labeling and pictures and images that will cue them, and they'll know exactly what to find and where to find it. So we strategically group learning centers. So we take all those ideas that you shared, and then we also strategically group your learning centers so that anything that relates to language arts and writing is in one corner of the classroom so that materials are where they need them. Their word walls, their labels, their crayons, their pencils, everything is close to that. Although writing material is going to be in all the classroom at every center, we have a special area for language and writing. We also have a special area of the classroom where we include all those STEM centers, your science center, your technology center, your engineering center, your math center, your block center or construction center. And then, of course, you want to keep a separate area just for your creative arts, where children can move and there's music and there's art, right? The music and movement. And then, of course, the social studies area in preschool, such as your dramatic play center. So everything is in its own place. So why do we use learning centers? Because we want to give them that opportunity to play and learn through play, because we know that preschoolers are naturally wondering, are naturally wanting to play, but also because we want them to be exposed to language from the teacher and language from their friends. So they get that opportunity for peer-mediated instruction. When children are in learning centers, they get that opportunity to develop academic content, skills, and also that academic language that relates to the content. And sometimes we use learning centers just because children, preschool children, need time to be children, especially nowadays with so much stress. And it gives them that time to just develop multiple skills. Now, there's many different types of learning centers in preschool classrooms. Today, I'm going to share some ideas from just 9 learning stations or learning centers that are commonly found in preschool classrooms. I used to have a woodworking table, but not all preschool classrooms have a woodworking center. So these 9 are commonly found. The library, an ABC center, the writing center, the math center, the science center. I know that Head Start sometimes combines math and science. I personally like to have those two separated because when I have gone to observe classrooms, I know that one content will give in. So we tend to have, if you have more math materials, it becomes a math center and we forget about science. If you have more science, it becomes science and we forget about math. Those two are very important. Then, of course, an art center, creativity center, dramatic play is a must in preschool because that's the height of that age group, 3, 4, and 5. Construction center or block center, and then, of course, sensory. So earlier we talked about some that area, how to decide to set up our learning centers in the classroom. And several of you said attractively display materials, accessibility of materials for all children. And also considering that we need to provide enough choices for children to play in that learning center, not too many. When you give them too many, it becomes chaotic, but also when there's not enough choices, that becomes a management issue. So usually the rule of thumb is to provide 2 more learning center activities than the total number of children in each area. And that way, if they're working with something and they still want to play in that center, there's something else that they can get. Also, it's important to include pictorial directions so that children know exactly what's expected of them, especially because preschoolers are emergent readers, emergent writers. Those pictures tend to guide them. And then the visibility, right? Yes, realistic and concrete objects and visuals are very important. And the words to facilitate, right? Connect the word to the image, the word to that pictorial image so that children start making those connections, the labels. And always making sure that you can see every child from every corner of the classroom. So what other guidelines do you consider when setting up a play-based classroom with learning centers? And I noticed some of you already started including those. What other guidelines? Very nice, Madison. Always think about which are my quiet areas and my loud areas so that we can separate those. Earlier, we said we need to be able to see children from everywhere, right? No blind spots. Think about the height. That's right, of those shelves. And again, many of you said the traffic flow. That's important to consider. And many of you have been mentioning the labeling. It's so important to label, right? Word and image, that pictorial visual that guides children who are emergent readers, emergent writers. And then also remember to provide materials when possible, and if you can get help from parents or from translators, is to provide materials that are also labeled in children's homes, their home language, and materials that are relevant. Think about games that are relevant for children. Yes, the varied materials. Thank you, Virginia. And of course, all of these guidelines there's more. Accessibility, right? For children with disabilities. We want children to be able to walk and get across and move. We want children to have that option to work by themselves or work with others. So look at this, adapt classroom with play-based learning. I'm going to share a couple of visuals right here from real preschool classrooms. It says a library center. This is a math area. And in this particular classroom, they're used to working in pairs. Pictographs guide children. Labels that are color-coded so that children know what's in there. And although they're emergent readers and they might not know what it says, pretty soon they're going to be asking, teacher, right? It says here counters because the actual item is in there. Other teachers actually put the picture also next to the label. Like this teacher. Look at this. What do you notice about this organization? How does it help multilingual, bilingual, dual language learners? How does it help them? So go ahead and chat. It's color coded. That's right, Debbie. There's pictures. And that's one thing that I loved about this classroom. And I did ask the teacher, could I take a picture of this? I love that there's images. Everything has a place. Everything has a place. And there's actual several of those shelves throughout her classroom. And if you notice, there's also a stop sign so children know when it's open and it's closed. So interactive play-based activities are aligned to standards. So it's not just, I am going to put these pom-poms here, but what is my objective? What is the standard? What is that preschool standard that I'm addressing? This particular teacher had little wooden trays and everything had an objective. And when the children were playing with it, I knew the teacher was using the vocabulary, was guiding their play connected to the standards. Another preschool classroom that's clearly organized, color-coded, and labeled. This is a dual language classroom, English and Spanish. And then remember that children are less threatened, more motivated to learn when there's free choice. So it's important that we do have free choice during learning centers, but it's also important to include a management system. I like to call it choice with limits. And those limits is part of that guided play. And that's how we become developmentally appropriate. So choice with limits. So and I'm going to share with you a couple of those limits. So look at these examples. There's a planning pocket chart, which means children choose. There's a magnetic board over here. Children choose, they put their name there, but guess what's the limit is the total number of magnets. Once it's full, they have to choose another one. And it's in English and Spanish. There's a management with Velcro. And again, this one had 4 slots for children to put their name with their picture. And once it's full, they have to choose another one. So there's choice, so they look at all their choices. This teacher used canning lids and magnets. And the canning lids with magnets had their picture on one side, and on the other side, it had their name. These teachers used clothespins, and on the other side, they use tongue depressors or paint mixing sticks, those made out of wood. The sign using a picture frame also guides children so that they understand, oh, this shelf is for the writing center. So everything that's here is for this center. So I'll give you some breakout room time, and I want you to think about free choice learning with limits. How do you manage your learning centers free choice with limits? And if free choice is not one of your systems, start thinking about, how can I manage my centers free choice within limits so that we provide children with that guided play? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to discuss that in your breakout rooms. So go ahead and during uh, I was saying thank you so much for joining your breakout room and sharing all those ideas on how to create that balance, right? That there you want to be child-centered, which is that free choice of the learning centers or learning stations, but you also want to guide them, right? So that there is management and there's flow in the classroom and children get to work with as many activities without chaos. So free choice learning centers, choice within limits. So go ahead and maybe a couple of you, would you like to share? And you can unmute yourself. How do you include free choice within limits? Who would like to share?
I know a lot of in my group we have names or for each child, and they can go to a certain center, but that center only has a Velcro sticker for 3 kids or 5 kids, and when it's full, you have to wait your turn until that opens up again. And sometimes some of the children have a hard time with it, but most of the time they move on and find something until it opens up again.
Yes, thank you. And that's part of that self-regulation, right? That a preschooler's self-regulation. This is what I want and I want it now, right? And being able to learn to understand that, okay, I really like that, but it's full, so I have to choose something else. Thank you.
We also talked about that, and in some of those high traffic areas, where the kids want to all go at the same time. We've seen where I've particularly seen, and some other people did too, using a timer or a wait list with the names written down. So who like to know who is next. And then we say, okay, after 5 minutes, then it's someone else's turn to kind of help facilitate that.
Excuse me. Thank you, Amber, for sharing that. So that's great. Using a timer or a checklist or a sign-in list. I've seen those in the classrooms where they have those sign-up sheets for certain centers. And then sometimes I've also seen where the children just naturally it's like a dance. It's learning center time and they all kind of just spread out. And many years ago, actually, my research was based on play-based learning. Oh, like 24 years ago when I got my doctorate. And it was on preschool children and learning centers. And what I learned is that those classrooms that have the least management problems, it's because all their centers are really attractive. See, what tends to happen sometimes is if my dramatic center is the best equipped and planned center, then nobody wants to go to the writing center. But if I see that the writing center is just as equipped as the dramatic center, then children start to divide themselves. So learning through play is not easy because many times we just think it's just take out things and put them here. Learning through play takes a lot of understanding our customer. And our customer are preschoolers. And preschoolers have certain likes and dislikes. And that's hard because you've really got to observe them, get to know them. That if everybody goes to the, let's say, construction center, but nobody wants to go to the writing center, then we really need to observe and assess, what do I have in the writing center that's not attracting my customer? So the role of the teacher, during learning centers is to always be very intentional when we're planning every single game and activity. We have to set up, and we set up and we introduce, right? But we also know that sometimes we have to be changing materials when they're not interesting anymore. Sometimes we model and we arbitrate, and we must always evaluate. Evaluate our center, how well equipped, how are children using it, but we're also evaluating children. What are children learning? Are they mastering the skills? Could I present that activity or make it even better? If children are not choosing a certain center, find out why. Why is it that they don't like it? What can I bring in there? So I have another example here. Children at a construction center. So based on the type of questions that we ask children as educators, even as parents, we help children form habits of mind. Their mind is used to thinking at a certain way. So let's pretend children are in your construction center, and this is what they built. What would you say to scaffold their language? So go ahead and include it in the chat. Very good. Talk about the animals that live there. Talk about the animals that are on top. So you introduce the word top, bottom. Talk about the number of levels or floors. Talk about the way the children categorize these animals. Talk about math, the number of animals. You see how there's a lot of content? Excellent ideas. Talk about how many in each level. Talk about what they're doing. And then help children think about how they classified those animals, right? So as teachers, we facilitate all the learning stations. Many times teachers ask, what should I place in my learning centers or learning stations? And I'm going to share just briefly. I am providing you with a handout with more ideas than I have time to present, but I'm going to go over some of them. So when it comes to learning centers, because we want to focus on content and language, we include materials that are interactive, interesting to the children, interesting to the culture of the children, that they can make connections. Think about, what do they have at home? What do they have in their neighborhood? Interesting materials that provide opportunities to learn through hands-on, but also minds on. You want that mind on. No worksheets at Learning Center time. So look at some examples right here. Look at this. This is an example right here. Just start collecting buttons, but make sure they're age appropriate. Nothing that's too small that becomes a choking hazard. Think about the vocabulary that we can target. What vocabulary could we target here? Yes, think about vocabulary that deals with sorting. We're going to sort them by size. So talk about small, medium, large. Talk about the number of loopholes, the number of holes in the buttons. Talk about the type of buttons. Some of them are made out of plastic. Some of them are made out of wood. Some of them are shiny. Very good. What can we do with buttons? rolling dice and building towers is another favorite of children. And then think about organizing effective science learning stations, because we want children to be, gravitating to that science area so we can focus on activities that are inquiry activities that make children think, that they have a question, which ones, I wonder which ones do this. I wonder what will happen if. Maybe organizing your science center by concept boxes. You can have a box that deals with anything to do absorption uh, experiments, or sink and float experiments, or magnetic testing experiments. Look at this. Just a shoebox covered in contact paper becomes the story box. And children, when they open it at the writing center, they get excited. They start talking about what's in there. Sometimes they'll even be giggling. And what we've done with some of the preschool classrooms is we have a story box. We also call it La Caja de Cuentos. And on Fridays, different children, we take turns. Every Friday, a different child takes it home, and we ask the family to you can come up with a number, 3 items or 5 items, anything that comes from home. And then when children go to the writing center, they open up the box and they just start talking about the items, and they start drawing a story. Think about the story that can arise or may arise from a fork, a dog, a wedding. It's a wedding little gift that you get, a wedding favor. Look at this. Writing with salt. Just get salt, put it in a Ziploc bag, add 6 drops of food coloring, shake it, it dries like in a minute. And then you put it in a tray and children can start writing. Boy, writing with salt or spelling with salt is going to be competition for that dramatic play center. And then you put it next to your word wall, or bring your word wall close to the writing center. So when it comes to writing, we really need to think about how can we make it attracting. So for children, those preschoolers, so they'll be wanting to write. Using your muffin tins with your magnetic letters for writing and spelling. Using just regular paper plates, and you can create all kinds of puzzles. Just remember to add visuals. Think about those tangrams or pattern blocks that you have, and children can also use it in the writing center, the alphabet center, as they create letters. Start collecting stones or rocks, or ask children to collect some from home. Making your library center attracting and cozy. Think about open-ended activities in the art center, because that allows children to express themselves, and it allows them to become risk takers. So instead of always giving them crafts where they have to come up with something that looks exactly like the teacher, open-ended. And then, of course, the popular one, dramatic play center, that always correlates with your themes. In this case, I went to a classroom and it was the bakery, la panadería. Although those children wearing that baker's hat told us very clearly that their bakers don't wear that hat. So we had to make modifications based on the hat that they were describing. Then the children in the center, coming up with centers that are very inclusive for children with all different types of needs. And that particular Head Start Center, working with 3s and 4s, was working with families in a migrant community. So the teacher brought in children's funds of knowledge into that center. And then the last one, in that classroom, children were talking a lot about their, parent, their mother or their grandmother, or they knew somebody that worked at a hair salon. So the teacher connected the dramatic play center to children's experiences and prior knowledge. And of course, flannel board stations. And then it's always important to bring assessment. I think that sometimes we don't give play enough credit because we just allow children to play and we don't connect it to assessment. So it's important to assess your learning stations or your learning centers. Create individual assessment sheets or checklists, keep a journal or clipboards or take notes. How are children using the material? How often do they choose certain centers? How are they mastering the objectives for every center? And we share that with our families, and we share that also with our administrators so that they'll see the value of play. When it comes to learning centers, I like this quote that says, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. The more children, especially multilingual, dual language, bilingual children, emergent bilingual children, the more opportunities they get to do, the more we're setting them up to understand. This is a question that sometimes I get, which is, in what language should I engage the children during play? And the answer is, what do you think the answer is? In any language. In what language should I engage the children during play? Even when language of instruction is English, continue to provide opportunities for dual language learners to develop their home language during play. So they will always use the language of learning. As teachers, we use the language of modeling. So that if we are wanting to model the English, we use English. If we're wanting to model their native language when we can, then we use that. Play is a motivating activity that provides opportunities for language learning in meaningful social interactions with peers and educators. So teachers continue to expose children to English while children play. And children, they choose the language that connects to home when they're playing, right? So remember to continue guiding children's learning and creating that developmentally appropriate environment with play-based learning opportunities that are tailored to the needs and interests of all children. And then remember that we have a role, and our role is to include that guided play and connect that guided play to that free play so that children are motivated to use language.